Barley is a brawler that fell from absolute grace, fading into mediocrity as a pick you only use when better picks are banned. Let's take a look as to how this affects Barley's viability and how it relates to a problem with throwers as a whole. As a reminder, this video is meant to serve as a sequel to the Brock PowerPoint. Brock detailed what to do. This video will detail what not to do. It's not a necessary watch, but I do recommend it. Barley is a member of the artillery class, but so is every other artillery. But unlike Brock, the difference between Barley and other throwers is a harder mystery to solve. Let's look at his kit first. Barley's attack is a lingering puddle that lasts for 1.9 seconds, basically 2. His super is 5 of those spread in a wide pattern that last for 3.9 seconds. Barley's lingering abilities have decimal numbers because the initial impact counts as damage. So, you only get those 2 or 4 ticks of damage if you land the ability. This means his impact damage is guaranteed. While this is good, it also means that 50% of his attack damage is buried under a conditional, whether or not the enemy stays in the puddle. His attacks also have the same effect as dynamites, where attack travel time depends on distance thrown. So, if you throw attacks directly next to you, they land almost immediately. Since artillery brawlers as a whole share the same attack, and Barley's super doesn't really provide anything novel to his kit, it's helpful to look at the attributes of his main attack to find out what his playstyle is. So let's do just that. Since he can attack faster at closer ranges than longer ranges, he's meant to use his attacks to defend himself. And he has a lot at stake to defend, with one of the lowest health pools in the game. His lingering attacks help with this, though. As a Barley, you must zone the enemy away from you at longer ranges, since direct hits are hard to get due to his slow projectile speed. His super helps with this. At closer ranges, you have to spam attacks onto the enemy so that they stack and kill them. His first gadget helps with this, slowing down enemies so they take the full 2 ticks of damage. For a long time, this was a good formula, and Barley thrived. He was a good all-rounder thrower that had a very solid and exploitable game plan. But now? Well, all good things must come to an end. And Barley was fine, depending on who you asked, but he was nothing compared to Larry and Lori. So the twins, released quite recently, were 2 brawlers in one. An artillery named Larry and a spawnable shotgunner named Lori. For the sake of clarity, I'll refer to the twins with their names. Larry's attack is, for all intents and purposes, the same as Barley's in terms of mechanics, down to the lingering mechanic. But on Larry's release, he had more damage, more health, better range, and better speed. Not to mention the elephant in the room, Lori. While Barley has no defensive play, Lori is a spawnable meat shield with so much damage it puts Bruce to shame. And even though it's an AI-controlled bot, it's still very efficient at pushing enemies back. With this defense, Larry had the ability to not only sit back and zone enemies with his insane punishment tools, but also go aggressive with Lori. This let him control the tempo of the match exceptionally well, so he countered pretty much everything. And I know about how this is Barley's video, and Larry's stealing his thunder yet again, but that's the point I'm trying to make here. Larry's release was probably when the problems surrounding this class became most apparent. With the ability to both punish and aggro at will, Larry put every single other thrower to shame. People naturally began to ask the question, what makes each thrower so different? The answer? Nothing, really. Brawlers separate themselves with team roles, matchup spreads, and playstyles. And each of them had small differences in terms of mechanics, which definitely contributed to differences in their playstyles. But their roles and matchups? Well, unlike the marksman class, artilleries can't have attack quirks that separate them from each other. For example, the marksman class contains brawlers from Janet, who can change her attack range by holding it, or Angelo, who charges up his attack at the cost of natural heal. But the artilleries can only have the same kind of throwable attack, for 2 reasons. 1. Differentiation in range doesn't work. Artilleries have a common trait in that their attack pressure ranges are relatively unobstructed by walls. Since they can hide behind walls and wait for enemies to come to them, their range doesn't matter very much when, either way, they're going to have pressure ranges that outperform others. In fact, range only matters when artilleries are against each other, which is why in maps like Shooting Star and Bounty, Tick tends to be a staple pick due to having uncontested range and zoning in mid lane. Sprout and Grom have similar ranges, so they tend to be picked when tick is banned, but other artilleries who do not specialize in these matchups are not picked. The ones that are picked, though, compete for one singular role, the thrower in mid. This is why differentiation in role doesn't work either. When a thrower is needed, it's because throwing attacks are so powerful, and by virtue of being throwable, they all share similar characteristics. Think about map differences. In a closed map with lots of walls, an artillery's ability to bypass them becomes more valuable, and having throwable abilities becomes straight up broken. When the map starts to become more open, though, throwers become weaker to aggressive pushes that can rush them with very little counterplay. It's very hard to balance the strengths of throwable attacks because they depend so heavily on the map. In other words, when a team needs a thrower, they need a thrower. Not a long-range thrower, not a damage-dealing thrower, just a thrower. And this is where the sameness syndrome lies. Marksmen are picked because they are marksmen, but at least Brock is separated from B as a choke point controller versus a tank killer. This same logic applies to matchup logic as well. Since all artilleries have some way to bypass walls, they all innately have these crazy defenses through just their attacks. This means the average health and speed for artilleries must be low, since they can't just be straight up impossible to hit. Low health, regular speed, same attack. It sounds like thrower design is getting more and more restrictive. Of course, there are some throwers like Dynamite who break the mold and go with a faster speed, but that only scratches the surface. We've never gotten a 10-tile range thrower, or a very fast thrower, for example. We can look back at Barley as an example of this problem. Even now, with his current stats, he's just a more extreme version of Larry and Lori with less resistance against aggro and more zone potential. The devs have looked to increasing his damage and decreasing Larry's damage in order to help him stand out. The problem is, even if Barley's damage gets increased, he's still replaceable if he gets banned, because his mechanics and matchups are relatively the same compared to other throwers. The previous video looked at Piper and Brock, and I mentioned that when they were the same, banning one would be like banning nothing. The same problem applies tenfold here. If you ban Barley, Willow's right there. If you ban Willow, Dynamite's right there. Even the small matchup niches that throwers have over one another get overcrowded. If Barley's range was increased, then that'd put him in competition with Tick for zoning potential. If his health was increased, that'd put him in competition with Willow for a durability pick. And you can only have so many of those before the niches get overfilled. But remember, all of this is just a byproduct of how broken the ability to shoot over walls is. This is what propagates the sameness syndrome, and in order to truly fix it, we need more artilleries that don't have throwable main attacks. Penny is a good start for this. So what not to do is make the standard a broken mechanic for all brawlers within that class. It's not as cut and dry a case as the marksman, but applying the same logic from marksmen to throwers is what not to do. Thanks for watching. Watch this video, or this playlist, or join the Discord server.